I was asked this week to share my opinion on the Charismatic Movement. And I don't think that that's really a fair response for me to give on the Charismatic Movement, because it's not something that I really personally experienced very much. It's not really an expression of my generation's experience of Mass. I can remember growing up and going to some churches where the primary medium of music was guitar playing, but there wasn't really an understanding about what that movement was about in my own experience. So rather than talking about my own experience of the Charismatic Movement, I'd like to talk in general about liturgical movements, why they happen, and what their purpose is. Because I think that every time there is a movement to do a certain thing during the liturgy, it's as a response to something that we are seeking, some sort of a truth that we are longing for. The Charismatic Movement came about around the time of the Second Vatican Council as a response to the traditional form of the Mass, which today we call the extraordinary form of the Mass. And the response was the sense that in the older style, the people had less involvement in the liturgy, that they themselves were removed, that the priest did his thing, the people did their thing, and there were certain moments that they coincided, such as when the priest elevated the host and the bells rang and everybody knew, okay, the focus is on Jesus here. But there was a sense that something was missing. And I believe that the Charismatic Movement was a desire to propel people into more involvement during Mass. And I think one of the things that the Charismatic Movement gets right is that it encourages us to express our emotions, to allow our emotions to play a role in the liturgy. Because let's be honest, sometimes we go to church and we feel very strongly. Maybe we feel excited, maybe we feel nervous, maybe we feel angry. And we can feel like we have to check those emotions at the door, right? Because when we come to a liturgy, it is solemn, it is serious, we are very stoic, and we're not supposed to express emotions during the liturgy. At least that's the impression that we get when we go to Mass on Sunday. People who enjoy or get something out of the charismatic Mass are people who recognize the importance of that expression of emotion, of that integration, that our emotions are supposed to be a part of the liturgy, that we're supposed to bring those things to God and express them in a joyful manner, praising Him for the gift of emotions. But what can happen with all liturgical movements is that there can be an issue of it becomes about the movement and not about what the movement is representing. So for example, in the Charismatic Mass, we are trying to engage and enter into an emotional contact, I guess, with God, embracing all of that. But it can very quickly become about that. And if we don't have an emotional response, we can feel a disconnect. A number of years ago, I accompanied a small group of young people to Franciscan University, which is one of the real centers of the Charismatic Movement and the Charismatic Mass. And I was amazed when I went to the big conferences when all the young people were gathered in one place, and we had Eucharistic adoration, and we had Mass, and there was contemporary Christian music being played live. And it was amazing the emotions that there were in the room and how people were able to express those emotions. Now, I'm not a very emotionally expressive person myself, so I sat there very stoically like I'm used to at Mass. But I was amazed at these teenagers whose lives are very much emotional during those years, feeling able to express themselves during that time. But then after the conference, I asked the students, I said, how are you able to connect the charismatic Mass that we experienced here with our Sunday Mass at church? And one of the young people said, they're not the same thing at all. And I said, that's a problem. When we can look at the charismatic Mass and contrast it to the experience of Sunday worship and say they're not the same thing, we've missed the point of a liturgical movement. Because what the charismatic Mass is meant to do is to help us to enter into the ordinary Sunday liturgy with our emotions, recognizing that it's a part of ourselves. This is also true of the extraordinary form of the Mass. The extraordinary form of the Mass is, in a sense, return to the traditional way that Mass had been celebrated before. And there's a great more gesture, symbolism, silence, and there is a sense of that something is going on that is beyond our regular experience. When we come to Sunday Mass, it is rather commonplace in many ways. But when you go to an extraordinary form of the Mass, you know that something big is going on, something that defies words or even concepts sometimes. There is a reaching out to something that is higher. And when I speak to people who prefer the extraordinary form of the Mass, that's what they're looking for, that deepness, that seriousness, if you will, because the things of God are meant to be beyond. But the mistake can come when we go back to a regular Sunday liturgy and we are missing those things and we say they're not the same thing at all. But they are. At the heart of all of these expressions is the Eucharist. And all of these liturgical movements are meant to allow us to enter more fully into worship with our emotions, with that sense of we are doing something that defies our human experience, that is elevated. All of those things are true about every Sunday when we come to liturgy. So liturgical movements ultimately are about uniting ourselves more closely with what it is that we're doing on a regular Sunday. And as such, the liturgical movements tend to come and go. But it's interesting that the extraordinary form of the Mass, back around Vatican II, people thought, well, it's on its way out. And then it made a resurgence because there was a sense that something was missing in our experience, that we need that transcendence. Could it be that that's true of the charismatic Mass as well? Right now, I have to imagine there are some parishes that still have charismatic Masses, but it has fallen out of favor. I expect that there will come a moment in history where they will be revived because there will be that perceived need that we need to integrate our emotions into our experience of divine liturgy. But only time will tell. Liturgical movements are about us responding to our human needs and connecting them with our experience of Sunday worship. As to my opinion, I really can't say. I never experienced it in its fullness. But I can see the value. And a number of my friends who are now priests experienced Christ very deeply through one or both of these movements. And so I appreciate their value when we're able to connect it with the life of the Church and with what we'd call the ordinary form of Mass, which is anything but ordinary. God bless, and we'll see you next time.